Never has WoW released its own benchmarking tool. Hello everybody, hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I certainly did, and I'm very much looking forward to Christmas, just a few short weeks away. So I wanted to share something with you guys, and this is really coming from the perspective of a hardcore WoW player who for the longest time never tried any other MMO. It was actually thanks to an ex-girlfriend that I was introduced to Final Fantasy XIV right at the 2.0 reboot. Long story short, 1.0 had many flaws, and well, they definitely weren't aesthetic. The game did see a 3-year redevelopment. The series is doing phenomenal now. The FF14 community is one of the most rabid fan bases I know of. If you need proof, just look at YouTube videos of the fan fest this year in Vegas.
The warrior of darkness. Of darkness. This town certainly has changed.
People love the producer. There's nothing but 100% support from the fans to the directors and the development team. I think it's actually a great thing for MMO players to take sabbaticals, so to speak, and check out different games. There's really two great outcomes from doing so. Number one, you either find a feature that you like that another game is doing, and then you come back to your own community and perhaps find similar like-minded people and make a petition for that feature to be incorporated. Maybe not right away, but further along down the development pipeline. And the worst case scenario, you try another MMO, it's just a terrible experience, and then you appreciate what you have going on in your main game a little bit more. For me, that was trying out WildStar. It did its best. I think it was NCSoft who launched that, and I just wasn't feeling it, and it made me appreciate the little things like WoW's combat system hell of a lot more. Now, the purpose of this video, as you probably see from the title, is the concept of a MMO developing and releasing its own benchmark tool. This is, in my case, the former benefit of trying out a different MMO. I looked through forums for what the community thought about the fact that WoW has never released a benchmark tool. The closest thing that the community was able to kind of piece together as an alternative, a workaround, is to turn on your settings for FPS and other metrics in the WoW console, fly from one point to another on the world map using the Flight Master taxi system, and take logs of the frame rate, the resources used, and then compare and contrast after turning on and off different settings. But even then, they said nothing was certain. There was no clear performance mark indicator. There were things that were up for wild deviation based on if there were other people flying at the same time as you, different people on the same shard in the same zone, a whole ton of permutations. Very convoluted and not a satisfying solution for someone looking to gauge their system's ability to run the game. Now, there are those who would also say, well, why not use 3D Mark, PC Mark, or any of those standard performance benchmarking tools? Yeah, sure. Technically, that is also a very viable way to gauge your system's performance. But it's kind of tomatoes and tomatoes to me. A great PC Mark score is not an indicator that you will run a different piece of software to its optimal capacity. It's just like track and field. A great shot put score, that being your PC's overall performance, is not a clear indicator that you will do amazingly on the 40-yard dash. They're not exactly analogous. Games are written to use resources in different ways, and in some cases it's the fault of the software for not, fully utilizing drivers well. That's why I really love the idea of Final Fantasy XIV releasing their own proprietary benchmark software for each major content patch. By major content patch, I'm talking about a change to the first numeral in the traditional 1.0, 2.0, etc. And I phrase it like that instead of just saying expansion, because it's really up for debate whether or not you could call 2.0, aka the reboot, A Realm Reborn, an expansion. We have here are 4 different benchmark runs that I have compiled on my own system, which is a custom-made performance gaming PC. Another amazing thing I think that Final Fantasy XIV does with these benchmark tools is it introduces you to not only the world and the look and feel of their engine and their game, but prepares you for that storytelling to come in the current content patch that it was released in. So imagine, here 2010 is when the first benchmark tool was released. If you've never played the game yet, or you're very new to the game and you just wanted to check out your benchmark score during the maintenance period or whatever, every week MMOs have maintenance periods where they spruce up and probably restart the server racks. You now have a chance to learn something about the bosses or, the way that classes interact, because in these cutscenes during the benchmark tools running, you will see actual gameplay. Just kind of helps you immerse just a little bit more. It's just a really nice touch. It's icing on the cake. That is a great MMO experience. I think more MMOs should do it. To date, I've only seen Final Fantasy XIV do it. I know bigger sandbox games have a reputation for doing this, but I just think Final Fantasy XIV being newer on the scene than WoW and raking in substantially less income than WoW, in my opinion, I think Blizzard should be ashamed for not having thought of this or done this. Just the hubris. I mean, clearly they don't look at competition as hard as I thought they would have, because this is such an easy thing to do. It's low-hanging fruit, as some would say. Clearly they don't feel threatened by other MMOs, or else maybe they would have stole this idea, I mean, the concept has been out on the street since 2010, probably earlier. Anyways, I ran all 4 benchmarks on my machine, got pretty good scores, and I also went through and I tried to document the release date for each one. There wasn't, out of all 4 benchmark utilities, the one that was toughest to find data for was probably 1.0. At that point, I don't think that there was a whole lot of official documentation from Square Enix on how their, MMO is doing. I don't think there was, to my knowledge. I would have to probably use the Wayback Machine and really scrutinize their home domain to find anything. But the other subsequent benchmark utilities, usually there was an official announcement on their page which would notify the player base, hey, the new utility is out in advance of our next expansion or content patch. Go check it out. And then that easily gives me a date of when it was available. I was able to find the 1.0. The only reason I was able to find any date, 15 June 2010 for 1.0, is because the hosting platform for it, which happened to be NVIDIA, who they have a partnership with officially, saying that their games run best on an NVIDIA. NVIDIA had it up on an FTP server, and they still do. And that just happened to have an upload date associated with it, which happens to be pretty close to when Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was launched. Without further ado, let's get into this. I will occasionally pause throughout. I'll try not to interrupt the actual cutscene. I'll save my comments. All right, let's get into it. So, want to note here, before we get, I'm just going through the menu. So when you click on the utility icon on your desktop, the benchmark utility icon, it brings up this menu. This is the first thing you see, and it asks you to choose a character which will be displayed in the benchmark, as well as the resolution and the language. Now, one really cool thing about this benchmark is it's a snapshot in time as to the state of the race and gender availability in Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. So, as you now know, if you are currently subscribed to 14, you've probably seen a male and female gender option for each playable race. So here, male, female, Elezen, Lalafell. Now, one important thing here is that Rogadin, which are the large, bulky blue and orange guys, they only had the male option available to them. And the Mikote, they only had the female option available to them. By the time Realm Reborn launched, there was a male and female option for every race. Although it's never officially explained as to why that was the case in 1.0, I suspect, and I'm sure a lot of you will verify it or perhaps prove me wrong, I suspect that that was a carryover from Final Fantasy XI, which was the last MMO they produced before they got into 14. In Final Fantasy XI, the equivalent of the furry cat people were the Mithra, and in that game and in that lore, in the Final Fantasy XI lore, Mithra were female only because the male Mithra were very scarce. There was a huge gender imbalance biologically in the Mithra race, so that meant that the Mithra society forbid that males were allowed to adventure outside of their ancestral homeland because they couldn't risk losing any more males for whatever reason. They needed them to, reproduce and guard the homestead, etc. So that was a cool little bit, of explanation why you can only choose females. I didn't see anything, from my research that carried that logic over. This is just an assumption in absence of documented reasoning for that. Now, the Rogadin here, their closest cousin in FF11 would clearly be the Galga. They're both bulky. They have similar facial features, very strong, kind of rectangular faces, almost very blocky, Roblox-like. And they were, the Galka, as they were known as in FF11. Their lore explanation for being male only was that they kind of reincarnated. That's how they reproduced, through reincarnation at the end of their life. That's really all I could see why they appeared to be, I guess, asexual, being closer to male than female in that asexual dynamic. So for the purposes of the benchmark, I think I go with a he or male here.
Hear. Feel. Think.
Hurry back to your cabin, friend, lest you become the sea's next victim.
She won't hold much longer!
A brave one.
Mind the stations, men! Stow the damn goblins! Alright, who's next?
Gods forfend.
Make yourself useful, Scrag!
They're running away! Now they're coming back! What's going on?
Never seen anything like it.
Brace yourself!
A sight for me sore eyes!
Okay, so this is the end screen of the first benchmark utility. What it does shows your relevant build. In this case, it shows your processor and your graphics card, as well as your operating system. Now, you probably saw a few pixelation frames throughout that cutscene. That is kind of just an anomaly of recording such a highly stressful render. I was watching the screen during the initial recording of these benchmarks, and no such pixelation occurred on the main screen. That's just something that, that's a hurdle that OBS, XSplit, and whatever other recording tool you'll use will run into. This is the only benchmark tool that forces you to run the utility with DirectX 9. All subsequent utilities will force you, or at least give you the option, to run DirectX 11. It was kind of an oversight at the time. It looked like they didn't provide any sort of official score key to let you know what does 8776 mean. I was able to find a post which kind of gives some context as to the scores. Let me pull it up for you right now. So Alexia Arcos of the Excalibur world, back in 2017, shed some light on the scores and how they differed from all future scores, as you will see as we go through the rest of the benchmarks. They were kind of separated by 500 to a few thousand points in each bracket. So the score we achieved, and that's actually quite good considering we were adding on the extra stress of recording all of this, was 8,776, which falls into the category of extremely high performance, easily capable of running the game on the highest settings. Feels good. I mean, I would hope so. I definitely paid for this computer. I will put in my description all the parts I used in case you're curious in making this. So about the actual cutscene itself, for those of you who have played, I'm sure you know, that was the opening cinematic to the game if you chose Limsa Lominsa as your nation starting out. That's, you voyaging from wherever to Limsa Lominsa to start your adventure. Now there are also 2 other cities you could have chose, and they have different cutscenes. I think the development team chose to go with this one because it has so many more finer details to render all at the same time. You have the raindrops, the NPCs on the deck, the enemies, some of the magical effects, the Leviathan shooting over the ship, I think is the pinnacle of the stress that your system under in that whole entire cutscene. As far as atmosphere and storytelling, it did a really good job. It just pans across the whole lower deck of the ship, and you see that these are all a bunch of strangers who appear to be, in some parts of the scene, friendly. Maybe they're already friends. Some are loners. They just want to get a nap in, or they're seasick. It's just so much unspoken depth, that really kind of ties into this wayfaring, adventuring spirit before the game even begins. That kind of is permeated throughout the land. Very good storytelling, and this is just a benchmark utility. I mean, if they can convey so much in just utility program, just imagine what it's like to play the game. I mean, it's a great teaser. You don't even need to own the game to download this utility. It's a great marketing tool. On top of that, to this day, Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 is considered one of the most graphically intense games out there. And back in its day, very few people could achieve a 8,000 plus score because the development team put so much painstaking detail into flower pots, just lining the city streets. During the presentation that the new team, which developed 2.0, gave to the player base to kind of pitch them on sticking around and, you know, seeing through the 1.0 to 2.0 transition, they exclaimed that it was a beautiful but exceedingly clumsy world to play in because of how much rich detail the environment and the character models had. Without further ado, let's proceed on to the next one. Alright, next we have the Realm Reborn version 2.0 benchmark utility. This was released and has been accessible ever since August 2013. So at this point in the game's history, they tried their best to preserve what they could, but this is like the equivalent of the sundering that WoW players would have seen and the transition from Wrath of the Lich King to Cataclysm, WoW 3.0 to WoW 4.0. The world kind of got remade in some parts, while a lot remained the same. A lot of quests and elements of the game were cut or kept and polished and retuned to be less graphically intensive in certain areas in the name of playability. So here you will see, unlike the first utility in 1.0, you now have a little bit of more control over how your benchmark experience goes. You can choose to run this on low, medium, high, custom, or maximum settings in a variety of different modes. Something that you don't always see, you know, maybe it was just something they didn't consider in the first benchmark utility. I'm not sure how they go in others, in other games in theirs, but yeah, I think I go with maximum here just to see truly what I can do. So yeah, a little bit of a different output screen than in version 1.0. It's not a full screen watercolor painting from the official artist team in the series. Yeah, a little bit of a different kind of approach. It looks like they just thrust you into what a dungeon experience would look like. You see a little bit how the classes interact. This guy right here, the Makote Paladin, seems to be the tank in the party. And already seeing this utility, they're kind of introducing you to how gameplay flows, what kind of, armor is associated with what role. They had the Black Mage there casting what appeared to be Meteor on the final boss, giving you that impression, whoa, the cutscene ended when that meteor landed, so that's a spell I gotta, respect. And when I'm seeing it, landed in PvE or in PvP. The same kind of pixelation was there at times, where the screen just went wonky. I promise you, if you run this utility yourself, you won't see that. That's just a happenstance when you record under such stressful conditions. As far as the storytelling and that, they really were selling the mount writing and how they had an open world that really needed to be rediscovered. I think they're really trying to sell at the time. This is not the same Eorzea, that being like the equivalent of Azeroth in WoW. This is not the same Eorzea that you probably know and loved from 1.0. Different feel, but still a lot of things were the same. They showed off Ul'dah there near the end. That's a major hub, and a nation you can choose to affiliate with during character creation. Also, that was DirectX 11. Now we go into Heavensward, first official expansion. If you disregard, as most people do, A Realm Reborn as being an expansion, vice a reboot, available since April 2015. And Heavensward really stuck out from A Realm Reborn because it was adding actual new jobs, aka classes, for those of you in the WoW universe. They added in a new race, the Aura, kind of dragon humanoids. The males being a lot more pronounced than the females, which you easily could pass for human if you ran by them quick enough. Then you also had the addition of 3 new jobs. The Dark Knight, which is a tank, which probably looks and feels quite a bit like the Blood Specialization Death Knight from World of Warcraft. You also had the Machinist, a ranged DPS class, and the Astrologian, which was a different take on the healer. As you see here, you have the option of DirectX 11 or 9. If you go to settings, you'll see here that now, unlike having one main tab to configure prior to the stress test, you now have 7, which is quite peculiar. I guess there's just too many variables to fit into one without sacrificing explanation of what the heck you're actually changing. So they go into great detail here to do that. I end up going with maximum. It's also worth noting here too, before we get into the actual cutscene, that you would think with the addition of new jobs in Heavensward, you would have these cutscenes and these official cinematics focus on the new jobs, right? That's what WoW would do, at least. When Mr. Pandaria came out, they went really out of their way in the opening cinematic for the game to show off the Pandaren Monk, because it's a new race and a new class available. Instead here, they're really glorifying the Dragoon, which has been available since 1.0. So that's just a different take, I guess, than most other MMOs would go with. You'll see that again later on in Stormblood, aka 4.0, set of cinematics and benchmark utilities. They glorify the monk there, in addition to the samurai. Also, for further clarification, even though that this is the Heaven's Ward benchmark, the art on top of it overlaps with Stormblood. That's just something that I guess they changed. I guarantee you this is probably Heaven's Ward artwork for the entirety of the Heaven's Ward 3.0 series patches. It just looks like they didn't preserve that when they went over to Stormblood. Alright, so as you're seeing here, they went back to giving you that full screen, celebratory, here's your score, here's your overall assessment of your system, mirroring the first utility benchmark with 1.0, more so than 2.0 did. Once again, they give you the actual system score and your load time, now converted into real seconds, vice milliseconds, as we saw in the previous two instances. A few things that they really kind of impress upon you between 2.0 and 3.0 benchmark utilities are, first, the concept of how adventuring goes. A few times in 2.0 and this one, in 3.0 cutscenes, they show this adventurer or adventurers kind of congregating in city hubs, which you kind of see happen here. This is in FF14, they call this an aetheryte stone, and this is where teleportation happens. People teleport to a new city from another city. They land up, and they land pretty close to one of these things right here. This is kind of the WoW equivalent of a flight master. This is like your Hearthstone. This allows you to teleport to different places in the world. Aetheryte Plaza, I think it is, yeah. So they reinforce that's how it goes. You meet up with like-minded people, or you use the communication tools, and then you go forth and you do things like those dungeons they were showing you. Also, in this utility, they take the opportunity to advertise, hey, we now have flying. This was the first content patch in which flying was possible, something that WoW has been doing forever, since before 1.0 even existed for Final Fantasy XIV. Before the game even launched, that was a feature unveiled in Burning Crusade, a 2007 release. Also, they showed off a major new addition to the enemy list. The primal there, Alexander, that giant machine rising out of the lake. So they went to reinforce through the final battle that, yeah, this is Heaven's Ward. Dragons are going to be seen and fought tooth and nail, pardon the pun. And kind of like, this lines up really well with the official cinematic for the game. Human archer turned warrior by the time A Realm Reborn came out, now has traded in the axe for the spear, the polearm, and he has become a dragoon, as you would see in the official cinematic trailer. That's just like them also reinforcing, hey, you know, you can adapt, you know, and change up your class to better suit your evolving playstyle or outlook on the game, which has always been a big thing with Final Fantasy XIV. You're not locked into a class. You don't have to make a new character. You can just drop what you were using before, pick up something new. It's as simple as equipping a new weapon. You know, given you might have to start with the base classes and develop the prerequisites, but it is possible. Another subliminal message that they are sending in a benchmark utility, which I think is just so powerful and such a low cost, high reward thing for them to do. Okay. As we see here, it's just a rehash of what our score was. Now we go into Stormblood, the latest and greatest expansion that is live. Ever since earlier this month, we got wind of, through the FanFest, the new 5.0 expansion coming, Shadowbringers. But for right now, Stormblood is it. This was available April 2017. And a major feature of this game was the unveiling of new classes, no new races, most prominently being the samurai, who gets a lot of play in the official cinematic. As you noticed, same little artwork there on the launcher for the benchmark utility, same set of settings, and it actually remembers it from what you configured for the Heavensward version. Okay, so we're seeing the same formula as we did in the previous utility for Heavensward 3.0. Now, I will say that this is about 3,000 points lower than the score I had in Heavensward, but it's still enough to qualify for extremely high. Also, another thing I forgot to mention, in Heavensward onwards, they do make the note when you are on the page where you download the utility that the 1.0 scores are centered primarily on frame rate, whereas the A Realm Reborn 2.0 onwards benchmark scores are based on overall system performance. These utilities, they do a great job of conveying important themes for the expansion in which you are about to explore. We saw a little bit of Alamigo. That is the city that is kind of at the heart of the Stormblood narrative. The reclamation of this city that is in enemy hands, the enemy being the Garlean Empire. We see, training and preparation for ostensibly a resistance movement, but they don't tell you too much. This is all told through cinematic storytelling. We also see the Red Mage. That's a new class in addition to the Samurai. Even more importantly, we have a beach scene in which characters, ostensibly player characters, are swimming. That is a new feature. Up until Stormblood, water was just something you walked up to and admired from a distance. You kept dry. You didn't get in the water. Once again, imagine you're kind of just this, gamer who has never touched Final Fantasy XIV, or maybe you haven't even touched Final Fantasy period. You come across this, you see this utility being unveiled in your news feed on Facebook, Twitter, somewhere, somehow, or some way, shape, or form. You check it out and you can download it because it's not a requirement to have an account. This is a standalone utility, and it always has been from 1.0 through Stormblood and 4.0. You download it, you run it just because you're curious. Maybe you're not even interested in playing the game at first, but you just want to see what your score is because it's known to be graphically intensive. And then you see these things and you're like, wow, this looks cool. Like, let me give it a try. And then, of course, Final Fantasy Forever now has had a free trial policy where you get free playtime up to level 35. At that point, you will need paid subscription, which is like $12.99. No idea how long it took them to generate this benchmark, nor how long it took them to develop previous iterations, but whatever it was, I am sure that it has single-handedly been responsible for bringing in additional subscribers and or piquing interest, sustaining interest among the current player base for future content patches. I can't believe that bigger development studios like Blizzard have not executed on this concept yet. It's mind-boggling. WoW as it stands right now is a DirectX 11 game. It is now DirectX 12 as well. Now would be the perfect time to strike, especially seeing that people are going to be curious as to what all changes between DirectX 11 and 12. I listened to a few interviews with technical directors and members of the WoW team during BlizzCon, and some of them have hinted at the fact that DirectX 12 should result in a smoother, more efficient rendering of the game. However, the average player will probably want to see a hard number like this for their own edification. This goes beyond just WoW and Final Fantasy XIV. If you're a MMO development studio, you should seriously consider developing a benchmark utility for your game.
It's free real estate.
It doesn't have to be every content patch. It's just amazing advertising, and there's really no downside to it besides, whatever man hours you put into it. Anyways, thank you for watching. It's been a pleasure to share these with you. I had a lot of fun hunting these various utilities down just from a kind of game historian perspective. It just kind of shows the miraculous recovery of Final Fantasy XIV from its ill-fated launch to where we are now today. And with that, I wish you all a Merry Christmas here in a few weeks, a Happy New Year's, and hopefully I will be seeing more of you. Please like, comment, and subscribe below. Please keep me honest about how entertaining or informative this was, so I can refine future videos. Thank you all again. See you around.